Welcome. My name is Christopher Peter. The football season is only part of the year-round NFL experience. While the premier sports league in America and the world is only 17 regular season games, football fans watch any available football content at a much larger scale than the ratings of actual games of other American leagues. The market for live sports is strong and largely due to the reliable and growing football community. One of the most popular stops on the year-round calendar is the annual NFL Draft, where football fans get to see which players will be selected to potentially become the next pillars of their franchise and superstars that potentially can deliver a run towards a Super Bowl. For prospective players, it is the culmination following their collegiate careers and months of tryouts, workouts, interviews, and team visits. Most college graduates usually have some agency over where they will begin their professional careers. At the very least, they have the ability to choose what companies, organizations, or other types of employers they want to pursue work at. The respective employer may choose to extend an offer, where the candidate can either accept, counter, or reject. Not in sports. Players go through a process where their skills, character, performance, and other traits are measured for teams to determine what players to draft into their organization, for an opportunity to change the future of themselves and their families. For 2025, the process has just completed. So I'm going to give my thoughts on the big moments, stories, and my thoughts on my Philadelphia Eagles and other notable teams. Following free agency, the draft is the last major event where the roster for the next season is set. Aside from some last-minute one-year signings or training camp trades, let's talk about the highlights of an incredible and controversial draft weekend. Let us start with the biggest story surrounding the draft, and that is the slide of Shedeur Sanders, quarterback of the Colorado University Buffaloes and son of iconic Hall of Famer Deion Sanders. I will start out by saying that I am not a fan nor am I a detractor of Shedeur Sanders or his father Deion Sanders. For some reason, people seem to take a polarizing position of extremely supporting the young quarterback or finding joy in seeing his slide. I do not really have a position other than I hope he does well and enjoys a long NFL career. I wish that for all players drafted. I have not watched every game Sanders played in college. From what I saw, he is clearly very talented, but I could see that it is a hard evaluation when he really did not have an offensive line to keep him upright for very long. He was productive, accurate, and able to find targets like Travis Hunter, who is the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, led Colorado to many comebacks. But there were some games like against Oregon, where the Ducks defense met him in the backfield. Personally, I have never been completely sold on the idea that a player slid based on the media's educated guess of where they should go. Then they grade teams on how close the team picked against their mock draft, which is convenient to say the least. Where is the grade for how well they picked where players would go? I'm sure they make all the phone calls and do their homework, but I could imagine some information disseminated to them may not be complete or still standing at the time of the draft. Maybe the player was always going to be drafted where they were. From a sports fan perspective, I can see how the slide of a top-rated prospect far beyond the floor one could ever imagine would be somewhat shocking and interesting at the same time, especially when there is not a clear and obvious reason for the public to see. You may tend to focus on the player throughout to see how far the fall may go before finally selected, all the while wondering why it is happening and who got it wrong. When this type of event happens, you have to question whether the talent evaluators and the media had it completely wrong. Did they simply not interview enough people or were given misleading info? Did something happen out of sight that is not known to the general public? Do the media talent evaluators know what each team is looking for in each position, or do they just match a perceived need with their rankings of the players? When someone, who is this well-known, slides down in the draft while broadcasting it on their own social media channels, it will obviously trend across social media. Also, there will be an attempt by media personalities, pundits, and others to try to shape the narrative or attempt to control how the public interprets the situation. If you look at chains long enough, you will see people start parroting the information stated on legacy media. The problem is no one really knows. Sports media tends to be held to a lower standard of journalism than, say, political journalism or financial reporting, as the stakes for the audience are significantly higher in these arenas. Currently, we have seen the issues those journalists are facing with the lack of credibility and objectivity in reporting. But we tend to tolerate it when sports reporters and pundits put out information not backed by facts, passing it off as fandom or passion for the sport they cover, ignoring the times the shape content around their personal leanings. So far, no team has come out and said a concrete reason why they passed on Sanders. And guess what? Teams rarely, if ever, give a reason why they chose one player over another. Like most job interviews, decision-makers tend to portray everything as positive, and they prefer the path they choose because of yada yada around the person that was selected. Because it generally does no good to have any negative sentiments, even if there were, to get out if there is a chance they may decide later to pursue the player as a free agent. The only information released was by The Ringer's Todd McShay, who pointed out that the interview with the Giants may not have gone well. But, as one would expect, the Giants head coach Brian Daboll retorted and said all the pre-draft meetings were good, but they liked their selection of Jackson Dart. The Giants, like any employer, are allowed to determine who is best fit for various positions. The criteria they hold for a starting quarterback based on their offensive scheme may be different than other teams. Same for all 32 teams. There are prominent members who are trying to shape the situation as akin to racism or collusion. The first does not hold water, as the first overall pick and first quarterback taken is Cam Ward, who is reported to have performed well in his interactions. And there are a great number of black quarterbacks in the league. 2 current ones and at least 4 overall have won Super Bowls as starters. So race is not really an issue. Collusion is another radical theory being thrown out there. If there was truly collusion, then why was he selected in the first place? Players without any negative baggage have dropped in previous drafts, as all the networks mentioned. Future Hall of Famer Aaron Rodgers went 24th to the Green Bay Packers in his draft year. And Marcellus Wiley pointed out so eloquently, as he often does, simple facts about quarterbacks who either won the Heisman or were finalists who have completely dropped out of the draft completely. Some of the more moderated sports minds that weighed in on the situation pointed out the reality that with the draft being widely viewed as weak on quarterbacks and not many teams believing they could land a franchise quarterback, the slide makes some sense, which many top quarterbacks in this draft all slid somewhat, except Cam Ward and Jackson Dart. Keep in mind, Dart was projected to be the 3rd quarterback picked, but many pundits called it correctly, feeling that a team would trade back in for him. My whole point is that the media will take this situation and run with it because it will drive their ratings and feed content for months to come. And they will create a story. Now, I thought my second favorite team in the Pittsburgh Steelers could have drafted him in the first round at number 21, but they waited until the very end to address their need, which I mentioned in the blog after round 1. He has talent and now has the opportunity to show teams that they may have been wrong. I like his attitude about the whole situation. Hope he competes and at the very least puts together enough good tape to earn additional opportunities. He will have to overcome Joe Flacco, who has played in this system, Kenny Pickett, who just won a Super Bowl and started games in the league, and will compete against a Heisman finalist in Dillon Gabriel. There is a more than reasonable chance to believe he can make the roster. Now, I said this draft was a bit more enjoyable as my Philadelphia Eagles are coming off a Super Bowl win, still have a formidable deep roster, and no critical needs beyond just adding talent and depth, and I believe they did that and more. Howie Roseman is a master of finding regardless of where in the draft the Eagles have a pick. In the first round, we got a dynamic edge in Jihad Campbell from the Philly area. We also added talent at cornerback, the offensive line, and defensive line. The addition of Campbell is big for our defense. We lost Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, and CJ. So I knew defense was probably going to be the focus. Campbell had a great career at the University of Alabama and looks like he will be a great fit for our defense. Interesting to see the pre-draft clip of Minka Kimes talking about the possibility of Campbell sliding to the Philadelphia Eagles, who did try to move up. Luckily it is Howie season and Campbell came right to us. I like the talent that we drafted, including safety Andrew Mukuba, who will eventually replace CJ. We replaced Darius Slay, now a Steeler, and James Bradbury, who was released. Mac McWilliams will have a chance to fill their void as well as other young talent already on the roster. I like that we added talent to both lines who can develop over time under the best offensive line coach in Jeff Stoutland and Clint Hurdle coaching the defensive line. I think Howie had another effective offseason given the salary cap constraints we had. He still will have to address Dallas Goedert. Personally, I hope they will be able to find a solution to a contract extension, as I think he is very productive for us when healthy. Tanner McKee will be the backup with Kyle McCord competing with Dorian Thompson-Robinson for the 3rd spot. The Cleveland Browns were having a really good draft up until the end, where they seemed to draft 2 quarterbacks out of order. Instead of taking the once-in-a-lifetime generational talent in Travis Hunter, the Browns took the long-term approach by securing a massive haul and still adding quality talent in Mason Thomas and Judd Kins later on. They drafted Dillon Gabriel in the 3rd round and then with the last pick in the draft selected Sanders to now have 5 quarterbacks on the team with 4 physically able to compete. The process kinda creates a weird dynamic of 2 veterans on 1-year contracts essentially and 2 rookies drafted opposite of their ratings. Flacco has the most experience and played in the system. Pickett just won a Super Bowl with 1 start, but seemed to have assurances to be in the starting quarterback conversation. The Jaguars got probably the best talent in the draft with Travis Hunter, which is a nice addition to the top of the draft talent they secured just a few years ago. They already extended their own former 1st overall quarterback in Trevor Lawrence and are giving him another asset to try to return to the playoffs after a meagerly disappointing season last year. The Giants had a good draft, adding the top defensive talent in the draft and securing their potential quarterback of the future in Jackson Dart. They also added a hard-to-tackle running back as well. A good draft for a front office and head coach who are both on the hot seat entering this critical season for both. Another side note, I love the video on social media that showed Campbell sacking Dart so hard that his helmet flew off. I think the NFC East overall had a good 3 days of the draft. The Dallas Cowboys and Washington Commanders added to their needs. I know there were rumblings because the Cowboys went with Tyler Booker over Golden, but it does not hurt to invest on either line with top talent, especially when you lost a number of linemen over the last couple off-seasons to free agency and retirement. Does Andy Reid ever have a bad draft? The Kansas City Chiefs addressed their line issues and showed they had no hard feeling over the butt-kicking they received in the Super Bowl by trading with the Philadelphia Eagles in the first round. Reid and his general managers are always very good at finding talent that fits his schemes and needs even if they are not the most heralded by the media. The Tampa Bay Bucks handed Baker Mayfield another weapon to try to advance in the playoffs, adding Emeka Egbuka from the Ohio State Buckeyes. Should bolster the team's chances to separate themselves a bit in the division, although Atlanta did help themselves with defensive additions. Baltimore added talent to their vaunted defense, but they also added a kicker. Their future Hall of Fame kicker Justin Tucker had an off year like no other last season. More importantly, he is facing some serious allegations that may lead to him missing time if proven at fault or simply deemed to have violated the personal conduct policy. The Pittsburgh Steelers had a good draft but better hope Aaron Rodgers does not choose retirement. They did draft Will Howard, but they clearly do not have talent already on the roster to lead the offense from game 1 to 17 at least. Will Howard is deemed by them as a developmental talent and Mason Rudolph is good in spells. They had added good talent in the draft and great talent in free agency. But it all does not matter if they do not have a quarterback. The real question at this moment is which team is the best positioned to win or at the very least make a run to the Super Bowl. The Chiefs still have all their pieces in places and Patrick Mahomes with a new haircut will look to rebound from that horrid performance in the biggest stage. Travis Kelce does not want to go out the way last season ended, so they will undoubtedly be a force to be reckoned with. The Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills are always in the conversation, but both seem to be more of a reliable win for the Kansas City Chiefs rather than a contender to actually make it to the Super Bowl. The Niners lost a great deal of talent and still have to sign Brock Purdy. They could not get it done with the league's best talent over the last 4 seasons, so I will have to see what it looks like before considering them a title contender. The Rams are built quite nicely for a run or last gasp with Matthew Stafford, praised for winning the Super Bowl with the mindset of F the picks, but it turns out that draft picks are necessary as it has been a long road back to contention. They have had a good off-season, but can they push aside the Commanders, who also built up? The Lions are still going to have a say along with the Packers. But I think the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles still have the best roster in the NFC, if not the entire league, and still have the potential for another title. It will hinge greatly on how well Season 2 of the Saquon era goes, and how well Kevin Patchello does in his first go as offensive coordinator. They have added depth despite their expected talent losses. If I had to choose 4 teams to compete this year, I would have to say at this point it is the Chiefs, Eagles, Rams, and Ravens, not necessarily in any particular order.
Now, let us look the draft from a different perspective. All the major American sports leagues assign talent through a draft. The NFL draft is a major fan event every year. To some degree, the NBA draft is also a must-see event for basketball fans, and no, the NHL draft takes place with the Stanley Cup just barely being awarded. And baseball selects the next crop of stars before the best all-star game in all of sports is even played. In soccer, there is no draft. Rather, the best soccer teams in the world sign and develop talent from around the world. There is free agency and players can have their contracts bought out in similar manner as trades, but funds are transferred instead. A different sports environment when you consider soccer players outside of the United States develop in academies, not in collegiate competition. And players do eventually get a chance at free agency. But what if there was only free agency like soccer? The question we are raising is whether the draft concept, a very popular process, should be replaced with some form of rookie or new talent free agency. Current college athletes are already used to free agency with the transfer portal and NIL issues. Why continue to assign talent in a process is kind of counter to our overall economic principles.
Personally, I love watching drafts. Good excuse to gather with friends and watch people get job offers. It is really the only thing in sports where everyone is truly positive overall, because there is something unifyingly positive about watching young talent see their dreams come true. Even if it is on a team that rivals your favorite team. That is really the magic of drafts, is the human experience. I was happy for Tyler Booker because of how jubilant he was being picked by the Dallas Cowboys. Great emotion. But as a political economist and supporter of free market capitalism, I do believe that choice should matter in any market. The market should generally be free of compulsion. The idea of assigning talent is generally counter to economic traditions and how our labor markets generally operate. But these are not normal labor markets. Let us imagine for a second Apple, Microsoft, Samsung, and Nvidia drafting talent for their respective companies in this space. If there was a tech combine and process where new hires could interact with employers to display their talents, weaknesses, and potential to each at the same time, I guess corporate recruiting and job fairs may provide some level of similarities. But those talent still picks and chooses who to engage with, and businesses only have information on ones that engage with them or recommended to them. I think businesses would prefer the sports model over the corporate recruiting model, where they may miss out on talent from the beginning. We have to keep in mind there is a major difference. Apple, Microsoft, and Samsung are all independent organizations competing in the same industry. The teams that operate in the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, and Major League Baseball are franchises part of the league as its corporate entity. The franchise model does play an important difference, as it is really allocating talent within a corporate structure rather than as an industry as a whole. Companies may have similar approaches. I worked with a large health system where their procurement department allocated talent based on team need, not necessarily based on what the individual talent wanted. New hires were assigned to a general team for onboarding and initial training, but then the service line teams would then select people based on their skills or alignment. I am sure there are many other corporate entities that allocate talent in a similar manner. Management consulting, medical sales, and other fields. While the draft concept does apply to some degree in corporate America today, there may be a legitimate reason to consider applying traditional industry recruiting practices to the intra-industry model that is franchises. As mentioned, the NCAA already does it with the transfer portal and recruiting. After 5 to 6 years, players will be able to experience free agency anyway. So why not from the beginning? There are issues that would be created by pursuing a different path than the draft. First, not all leagues are competitive throughout. We know that there are constant complaints in basketball and baseball that some team owners simply view the teams as financial assets. Football has been able to avoid that over the recent decades, but it used to experience that challenge in the past as well. In a typical industry, competition is good for the consumer, but not a necessity. If a monopoly is able to provide a good quality product to the broadest population of the market at an affordable price, then there may not be an immediate need for a competitor at the same scale as it. Athletics requires that teams have other teams even for the sole purpose of playing the games. Leagues need some level of parity and competitive balance, and that is why there is a draft. Even if a team is not a player's preferred destination or able to spend on free agency, it can compete by strategically drafting and developing talent on a repeatable short-term cycle, trading talent for assets to continue to repeat the cycle. The Moneyball approach to sports. Even outside of sports, companies will operate locations that are not as profitable as others because it needs a strategic presence. For example, you may see an Express Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts in certain areas rather than a full-scale location, just so they can still reach existing customers or potentially poach some of the others' customers. These locations need to exist like franchises in sports that may be the Washington Generals to the Harlem Globetrotters, of the Memphis Grizzlies to any other Western Conference team lately. In a market with a hard salary cap and roster limits, I do think we may still see similar outcomes, as teams would not find it beneficial or feasible to try to hoard talent. Even in free agency, you still see teams pass on talent they simply do not want to allocate cap dollars on. So I think even if you have a rookie salary cap and free agency, there would still be players who would have to look for opportunities with teams that are not their first or second choice. The consequence is timing. Leagues really operate on a schedule that is an actual schedule of games, training, and playoffs. The time it would take for regular free agency followed by rookie free agency would extend the time frame of roster building, giving certain teams an unfair advantage simply because they may be in a location that is more desirable based solely on climate. For instance, Green Bay having to wait for players to find out there are no more roles in Miami would delay Green Bay's ability to build its roster. I think it is important that we challenge our default thinking and really question new ideas also. Allocating the talent in sports is popular because it is tradition and we are used to seeing it and preparing for drafts every year. Also, it is the right approach to allocating talent because of efficiency for operations and stability for the sport overall. Drafts in sports are not a conflict to our free market ideals. A big thank you to the audience for experiencing this podcast. The Christopher Peter Review, your source for an economic perspective on salient current events. Please continue to visit the Christopher Peter Review at www.crcreview.com for more, or subscribe on YouTube. Thank you again and talk to you next time.